have Garrett ONeill, police officer at Technopolis. Here we have Brian Cahill, that probably all of you know. He's a former MCAA chair. And we have Sebastian Dahle, who is the vice president of Eurodoc. And I am Giulia Malaguarnera. I am the current secretary of the Military Alumni Association and the Outreach and Engagement Officer for OpenAir. Since we are starting in late, I would kindly ask Brian to start the presentation.
Thanks very much for the nice introduction. Now, if Sebastian can share my slides, I don't know if they're, that's great. So, next slide, please. And this is about the Opus Project, which is a project which aims to develop coordination and support measures to reform this. To reform the assessment of research and researchers at research organizations and research funders, and incentivize the uptake of open science practices. Next slide. That the consortium is from all across Europe, from many countries. We don't need to stay here very long. We go to the next slide. That many of these organizations are research performing organizations, such as universities, but also research funders, such as UFISCTI from Romania, or the Research Council of Lithuania, but also SMEs and researcher organizations such as Eurodoc, MCAA, or iCorsa, so that we have a very, very good mix of research stakeholders, and also Viney, who have been very active in research careers for a long time. That Opus has 6 objectives. These are mainly the work packages. I think the first objective is to perform a state-of-the-art of the existing literature, initiatives, networks, and so on. The second is to develop a comprehensive set of interventions for implementing open science. Then in work package 3, which is being run by Technopolis, it's about developing indicators and metrics to make responsible indicators and metrics. And then in the 4th part, it's to test these metrics. And the 5th part is to implement feedback loops to give feedback on what has happened before, and then to carry on. And in the end, it will be that we will synthesize the outcomes of the project into policy briefs and to revise OSCAM 2. OSCAM 2 I will talk about later. That's the Open Science Career Assessment Matrix. So it's a way to assess researchers. This is largely exactly what I said in the last slide, but with added feedback loops. So if we move to the next slide, the impact of Opus will be to incentivize researchers to practice open science. The second is to increase the uptake of open science in the European research area. And the third is to increase the capacity of European research and innovation to conduct open science. It's basically to make open science the modus operandi, the normal way to do science. So it's not, in the end, it won't be that you need an incentive to do open science. It's that open science is the only way to do science. The next slide, I will just go through a lot of or some of the activities that the researcher organizations have been doing in kind of leading up to what we're doing now. So I think that the first slide I show here is the infographic that Eurodoc developed about the transferable skills that early career researchers develop within their careers, just by doing their jobs or by doing extra training. And if you look under research, you probably can't read it, but a lot of these have to do with open science. But I think some of them have to do with traditional research metrics like publications, but many of them don't. And a lot of these skills and transferable skills are what make them employable and also make them good researchers. So next slide. I said I would talk about OSCAM. This is in one slide. It shows the Open Science Career Assessment Matrix. This was presented by Conor O'Carroll at the Eurodoc conference. One of our project partners, Viney, was partly responsible for his drafting. In 2017, there was an expert group of the European Commission. And so it is called Open Science Career Assessment Matrix, but not all of the points have to do with open science. It is kind of a wider recognition of the type of skills that researchers develop or need to do their jobs. Next slide. That MCAA and Eurodoc collaborated for the joint declaration on sustainable researcher careers. Some of the people involved in drafting this are at this conference. And next slide, please. That the main points were to provide sustainable career prospects, deploy career management services, emphasize transferable skills and training, and to provide a wide variety of networking options in and outside academia. I think if you look at the Marie Curie Alumni Conference now and compare with 5, 6, 7 years ago, I think you see a lot more people who have industry careers are attending this conference. So I think that in some ways MCA is becoming a real alumni association rather than kind of where I think this is one of the roles that we play. Next point. There was also a policy brief that was developed by a social lab of the New Horizon Project. The New Horizon Project was a project that looked at the uptake of responsible research and innovation within Horizon 2020, and that social lab looked at Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions. And this policy brief asked to broaden the evaluation criteria for MSCA calls. So this is basically career assessment, research assessment within the context of MSCA, provide training for evaluators in how to evaluate proposals, including avoiding implicit bias in their evaluations, and to offer training within MSCA for open and responsible academic as well as non-academic careers, and toward MSCA grantees who engage with responsible practices, and to support knowledge exchange, communities of practice, and diverse and inclusive forms of excellence. So much of the research that we do has to do with engaging with stakeholder communities, and often this is not rewarded by traditional research matrix. Next point. So I've got to the end. So if you have, we will move on to the next part, which I believe will be done by Sebastian.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Brian. And now I would like to ask to the panelists to give 2 minutes of statement about your position regarding the research assessment. So I would like to start with Garrett ONeill.
Can you hear me, Giulia?
Can you connect from... Hola, can you connect?
Okay.
Vale.
I'll let you give me the sign, Giulia, when you can hear me, and I can go.
I can hear you, but I cannot see.
Perfect.
You can speak. Okay. We can hear you, but just a second.
Take your time.
From Zoom. Okay. Okay, now we can see you, and you can go ahead. What is your position, or the policy position about research assessment?
Right, and I'll try and keep this short so you can catch up some time. So, to put this very bluntly, research assessment has for many, many years and still does focus on research, peer-reviewed research publications in top or prestigious or high impact factor journals and citations from those peer-reviewed publications. That essentially is the crux of where most research and researcher assessment has been focused. So this needs to change, and the position is very simple. We need a much more comprehensive, fair assessment system that takes into account many of the different activities and outputs that researchers do. And not necessarily that you have to do all of these different activities or outputs, but rather that the many different activities and outputs that we do are factored in and taken into account. How you weigh them, of course, is another issue. So within Opus, our core plan really is to propose a comprehensive framework for researcher assessment. So looking at the researcher, more specifically their activities and outputs across different categories, and that this is essentially a suite of options that institutions, in particular research performing organizations and research funding organizations, use in their recruitment of researchers, in their career progression of researchers, and in the granting of projects and essentially funding awards to researchers. And such a framework, in our view, should be wide encompassing, so to speak. It should have multiple dimensions. It should take into account both research-related and non-research related activities and outputs. For instance, teaching is not necessarily related to research, but should be taken into account, just as student supervision or mentoring may not necessarily be tied to research. Another dimension is that it should also be both open and non-open, with a potential gradient in between this. So there are many activities that researchers do that could be opened, but that does not mean that we should only be rewarded for those activities and outputs that are actually open. Many, as an example, some research may involve biomedical or sensitive, confidential, intelligence or military data, and this should never be opened. But still, of course, you should be rewarded for having done this within a closed system. And the final thing is that an assessment system that we deploy should not strictly focus on numbers and be quantitative, but should be qualitative in nature. There should always be an explanation to any number used, and the researchers themselves should always have the opportunity to explain their own background and their own activities and outputs. I'll stop there, but I think that's the rough proposal that we are making from the Opus project and that we'd like to discuss with the MCAA community.
Thanks, Gareth. And now it's over to me. So I'm Clare Viney from Krakow Vitae, and I'm really sad not to be with you. And I've been following things online, so apologies that I'm not with you. We, as Gareth has mentioned, there's been a lot of activity. There's a whole. So one of the starts of the Opus project is to really look at the landscape of projects, experts, networks, organisations and schemes that are out there already. There's a huge amount of content and material which really confirmed what we all know as the research community, that there's a lot of goodwill and a lot of drive towards open behaviours and open values, which sort of drive this whole open science agenda. There's a real need to work in synergy. Because some of these past and ongoing initiatives really, there's been a shift in narrative. So perhaps in the Horizon 2020 projects that the Commission have supported, open science really isn't mentioned. It's more RRI or open access, the more sort of transactional, open, sort of open publishing, rather than actually looking at values or a career guidance and career and professional development approach. During Horizon Europe, we've seen a massive shift in the language and the narrative. So many of the projects are working much more explicitly on supporting the uptake of open science. But as Gareth and Brian have already mentioned, how you measure and monitor and move, that shift and movement is going to be really interesting. And we're interested to understand from you, the MCAA community, about how the OSCAM, so the Open Science Career Assessment Matrix, lands with you. It's very fundamental to something called the Researcher Development Framework, which Viney developed over 10 years ago. So, as Gareth says, we want to keep this bit brief so that we can have some animated discussions on your experience and where you think we can really make a difference with Opus as a project.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Sebastian from Eurodoc, and we heard a lot about open science and research assessment already, and yeah, I think one thing that we can all agree on is that really open science should become simply good science for all of the problems that we face today and all of the good things that are within that. And we also earlier heard already how research assessment was identified as one of the crucial things that's keeping us back. And this is actually in two directions. So research assessment done right can really leverage, can really make it easy for you to do the right thing, can really lead you to do the best practices. Done wrong, however, it can be tremendous obstacles even if you intend to do good things. And so research assessment really is something that we need to use in a proper way to make these things happen and to really allow us to do good science after all. However, if we look into how the research area looks like, the European research area is so tremendously diverse, and we're better to see this than here at the conference with the diversity that we have here, and that's an asset that's really good to have, but also in terms of research assessment and in terms of looking into different parts of the system, that can be a tremendous obstacle. And so one important point there then is to also think about research assessment needing different kinds of solutions in different places. There's no one size fits all. There's different kinds, different flavors that we need to take into account how we implement that. And yeah, this is something to keep particularly in mind, to then be conducive, to then not put additional barriers up also for mobility, to go between different systems and really be able to perform your science in the best possible way. Thanks.
So I would like to give my impact talk on how kind of a reform of research assessment. Hello, can you hear me? I would like to give, wait, it's working now. I would like to give my impact talk on how a reform of research assessment can help research to implement true two-way mobility intersectorally between academia and industry or non-academic careers. Because a lot of the problems with precarity that we have is that kind of academic training is very focused on training academics to achieve the metrics that are currently rewarded within the academic system. And if you look at the Eurodoc infographic on research skills, many of these skills that researchers develop are transferable. But if you talk to non-academic partners, they say academia is a different world, and what they mean is that academia is focused on metrics that don't have any relevance in the real world. This is like what Peter Gluckman was talking about this morning, is that academics may study kind of the environment in ways that have huge relevance for policy, but that does not get transferred to stakeholders outside of academia, although it may be highly cited. And so I think what we need to do is to form a way that researchers have metrics that are focused on development skills, but also competences that will be rewarded, such as mentoring, or I think I won't go through them all, but I think that we find ways to qualitatively reward researchers for responsible research practices. So with that, I will go back to Sebastian.
Thanks to the panelists, and now it's time for you to scan the QR code, because we would like to know more about what do you think about research assessment and open science. So put your tabs up. Okay. Oh, sorry. Can we show the presentation, the slides, please? Thank you. Okay. Mustafa, you are always the last one. Okay. All good, or do you have any issue? If you have any issue, you can go to menti.com and write the code that is above 45677359. Okay, let's go. Okay, so we would like to know what is your awareness of and attitude towards open science. So we would like to know from 1 to 5 each point. How do you engage with open science? 1, you are not aware. No, okay, sorry. Okay, how do you engage with open science? So these are some practices, and we would like to know from 1 to 5, how much do you know or you practice in your daily activities? Is the connection okay? Okay. Okay.
Giulia, just check, is it how much do I know or how much do I do?
Anyone from the panel would like to comment about this upcoming data?
Yeah, so it's really nice to see how many people are already very aware of all sorts of different practices. So not just open access, open data, who have been really huge in the discussions, but also other like open educational resources, even open peer review. There's many answers further to the right side, further saying, yes, I'm aware of that, and maybe even already practicing that. So it's really nice to see, yeah?
It's also true that there are some specific framework. Gareth, do you want to talk?
Yeah, I'm just curious if people are not scoring this a bit high. For instance, I'm quite aware of open science, and I'm not sure what open hardware is. So I'm wondering what people are understanding with some of the concepts here.
Okay. Okay, we continue with the slides, please. Okay, research assessment. We would like to know better about how we can implement and practice open science and what are the benefits. So, does practicing open science benefits or hinder your career? So, how do you see open science in your career progression? Yes. Okay. Clare, would you like to comment on this data? Clare, we cannot hear you if you're speaking.
It's sort of, yeah, I mean, that's not surprising, is it? I think because you're shifting from the norms, the research assessment norms that we have, and, you know, all of the recruitment and retention and the reward and recognition structures that we have. So to make that sort of shift, that seismic shift to a more open way of rewarding and recognizing, I guess there's going to be some apprehension, isn't there? That's what perhaps that was showing.
The benefits aren't clear, I think, for many people. Generally for open science and specifically for some of the specific practices of open science, which is of course why a change in the assessment system is needed, because it's completely not taken into account right now.
Thank you, Gareth and Claire. Okay, so we are proceeding. How can the research institutions can incentivize open science? So this is an open question, so you have to write it. I don't know, what is your position, Brian? How institution can incentivize open science?
Is this live? I think this is the big question with Opus, is what is kind of, I think, what kind of research institutions can do. I think practically what they can do is provide resources for open data, research data management, to provide resources for facilitating open access publication, and to a large extent, we're in the journey from open science being a relatively minority interest to open science being the new normal, the the way that research is done. So I think this is something that I think at the moment I'm working at the TIB. It's a German National Technical Library, and open science is simply the way that we do science. And there are some other institutions which maybe that isn't the case yet. But I think we're on a journey, and I think within the next 10, 15 years, I think we will reach the end of that journey where it's open science and is just science.
That's true. This is how the European Commission would like to switch the way we think about open science. At the end, it should be just science. It's interesting here, the feedback that we are having. And I would like to comment to some of them. For instance, I've read pay APC. So in theory, is the funders that should pay for APC and not really the institutions. So this kind of bartering shouldn't be only on the shoulder of librarians or university institutions. For sure, I think that we are all agree to have much more bonus and rewarding, more qualitative assessment and less metric, or someone is asking some examples of metrics. Before Brian showed some metrics that were not really just about open science, but it's now a matter of Opus to define some new metrics and how to provide incentives.
Giulia, can I ask a question back to the audience?
Go.
So somebody has said pay APCs, article processing charges, and I agree, researchers should never have to pay APCs. But how much? Is €1,000 per article okay? Is €5,000 per article okay? Is a €10,000 APC okay from a taxpayer fund? And is it okay if it's in a nature journal or not a nature journal? So should there be a limit on APCs for open access publications? I'm curious what the audience thinks.
Any answer? Anyone wants to answer? Okay, Karen.
Thanks. I mean, if anyone else wants to add, but I can start. I mean, I think the answer is, if we can move away from the obsession with journals like Nature, we won't be having this question. We won't have to answer this question. We won't need to pay these levels of APC. So I think that's the answer. And it's not, there's no easy way. I think it will be difficult, but I think that is the answer. I think APCs are too high as they stand currently, apparently for the publishers who hold power over the system. But the truth is, they're given that power by researchers because we're the ones who insist on publishing in those journals and making that the benchmark. So it's also up to us to change that.
Thank you.
Right, and with a different indicator system, you're trying in a way to break that monopoly, right? And shift it to other types of activities and outputs. The problem here, Karen, lies in whether, when we switch to new indicators, if it simply changes the targets, but for instance, the mega publishers still somehow manage to keep hold of the system. If we switch to data sets, for instance, publishing, reviewing data sets, making them both fair and open, will that be done through an open infrastructural procedure, or will that fall back to the publishers to manage, curate, and dominate, with potential processing charges in sight?
So Gareth, since you are also a former president of Eurodoc, I remember a statement that we did with the Young Academy of Europe and the Marie Curie Alumni Association about the Plan S and its implementation. So can you remind us what we asked?
So I won't go into the letter. There was 10 points there, and then there was a follow-on to it. But what I would say is that Plan S was very, very much needed at the time, and I think it still is, to try and get a hold, a grip on the publishing system. And I remember the initial proposals from Plan S were met with resistance from not just the publishers, but the research community. And as a consequence of that, they had to water down their demands and their conditions. Now, some of the demands, to summarize them, are that when you are funded from one of these funders in Plan S, you must open up your research publications. You must open up the publication immediately. Now, when I say immediately, that means the version of record, so the final article, or the author-accepted manuscript, so the peer-reviewed version that has not been finally decorated by the publisher, let's say, that this should be openly licensed, typically under CC BY with exceptions. And there's a couple of other points in there I won't go into, such as author retention or institutional retention of the IPR, which is very often transferred or demanded to be transferred to publishers. The point here was that Plan S was necessary at the time to try and get hold of the system. But note that Plan S did not set a cap on APCs. That was seen as going too far, even though some of the members of Plan S actually did set caps around 2,500 euros, like in Austria. So they are trying to take steps to, let's say, reclaim the publishing system. But again, this is not a revolution. These are reclaiming particular aspects of publishing, such as when we publish an article, the type of article we publish, or the version, the copyright on that article, and the licensing on that article. No major proposal was made to switch the funding. What we know is that we spend around 10 billion euros per year on scientific publishing, including big deal agreements and APCs, and that if we were actually just to switch to a paid open access system, it would probably cost around 4 to 5 billion. So just by switching immediately to open access through APCs, we would probably cut half the money that we're spending now. So room for thought, but Plan S did not go that far in terms of funding.
Gareth, you can't see this probably, but I've been given back the microphone, so I'm going to respond to your previous point. I mean, you're right. I think publishers will do all the effort they can to take control over whatever will be the new indicators. I'm saying indicators because it's my conviction that it should not only be metrics. There's a lot more we can do that's qualitative that will be a lot harder to completely take hold of. And I think these are the difficult discussions ahead of us. What is the balance between metrics and other forms of indicators? Where are they used? What is used at the kind of level of assessment of nations, institutions versus individual researchers? And I think if we can go to a much more qualitative form at the individual researcher level, there is much less chance that we fall into that trap again. So I think that's my hope for the future. But I'll hand back to the panel.
Absolutely, and just to close off on Opus there, we will propose a suite of options together with the community. There will be a consultation, but we will not make a judgment on which of those should be prioritized or how they should be ranked if you deploy several of them in an assessment system. That should be decided ultimately by both the institutions or funders and the community that they're assessing. How do you rank some of these metrics so that you will also avoid, unnecessary, unwanted effects?
Okay, Brian would like to answer as well.
I think that we're beginning to approach the part where it becomes interesting. Is up until now, the institutions have used metrics to measure researchers, and the European University Association did a survey in 2019, and the top two metrics that they used were publications and research funding. And to some extent, publications was completely quantitative, but research funding is quantitative to a certain point, how much money has been raised, but to another point, it is also qualitative because researchers have to write research funding applications and grants, and then this has a certain amount of kind of assessing the quality of the research. With this, the institutions are outsourcing the assessment of research by proxy to research funders and to journals and to peer review in various ways. I think now I think the question is, in developing new research assessment methods, is what the institutions are going to do to assess research themselves qualitatively or quantitatively. I think this is the big question, and kind of what help we can give them. So I think this is kind of where we need if there are going to be qualitative methods to assess research, what they are going to be.
Thanks, Brian. Do we have any question from the audience? Claire, if you would like to comment as well, please go ahead.
I think that how do we shift those behaviours and help researchers to make that leap of faith? There is obviously, this is a systemic challenge, and everyone has a part to play: the researchers, the institutions, the policymakers, the funders. So I think any guidance from the audience over how to get that behavioural shift at researcher level would be really interesting. So again, I'm kind of throwing it back to the audience. What initiatives and what interventions have you seen in your institutions that have really made you think about your open behaviours? Whether it's a data steward or champion or a piece of training that has been pivotal in transforming your attitude.
Thank you, Claire. So my question to the panelists would be, yesterday we were talking about some colleague, and today morning also in Latin America, open science in some cases, in some regions, are creating inequalities. So how are you think that we should deal with that? Because we earlier Gareth talked about the APC, but a lot of the colleagues from the other region of the world will not be able to pay the APC. Either they need to, it's literally more than 1 month of their salary, and their institutions are not going to pay. Their funders are not going to pay, but still they need to publish. Otherwise, they are not being evaluated at the same level of their competitors who are collaborators who are in Europe. So what are your comments on that, and how to deal with this inequality?
Some thoughts on that. So the APC, personally to me, seems in many parts like a proxy discussion indeed, because actually you can publish open access just as well in diamond open access journals, have no APC at all. So you have the same kind of publication, you have results out, they're just as well peer reviewed, they're just as well quality assured, or should be if the journal is listed. However, the point why we're not doing this more actually is the assessment. How do we care about the publications that we do if the publications are the main indicators? And well, the way we currently care about publications is what's the journal impact factor, which is an odd way to measure because it's an indicator for the journal, not the individual paper. So there's a mismatch that's not working out, and that's why it's in Corara included differently. And that's then why we strongly believe that this move forward actually will lead to APCs in many cases either drastically falling or at least these diamond journals, diamond open access journals, increasing strongly in popularity and thereby also solving this problem of exclusion of some communities, you know. So that's at least to some degree gonna present a solution, but the largest part of the problem actually is one of assessment again.
Thank you.
I think another aspect is how institutions themselves are assessed, because kind of institutional rankings are very questionable mostly, and it's mainly kind of you multiply the papers by the journal impact factor, and then you come up with how many Nobel Prize winners are in the university, and you come up with some number. And I know in Germany, where I live, that there was about 10, 15 years ago, there was a big debate because there were only 2 German universities within the top 50 in the world, and this was a big crisis. And then they came up with the Excellence Initiative of the German Federal Ministry, which was supposed to counteract that so that Germany too could have elite institutions, rather than kind of a network of institutions that cover almost all of the specialties and worked quite well, but not from the point of view of the institutional rankings. So as long as the institutions are ranked based on journal impact factor indirectly, I think this drives a lot of these behaviors.
And Giulia, maybe if I can respond to Mustafa.
Yes.
So, Mustafa, we have to acknowledge that the European system and needs have developed differently to the global south, where we see, of course, more of a closed system certainly in Western Europe, focused more on big deal agreements and APCs. We see more of an open infrastructural system and diamond access and publishing system in the global south. That's the way that's done. But even in Europe, there are differences. In Croatia, as an example, you have many government-funded and researcher-run journals for the researchers in Croatia where they don't have to pay APCs. The problem, of course, is that in many fields, many of the prestigious high impact factor journals do charge an APC. And that's the problem. And the real question is, how do you move from that system to a better system, perhaps a fairer system? Now, when I said Plan S, what Plan S has tried to do is take control of what we're paying for, not what we're paying. Open Access, the Open Access 2020 initiative explicitly did try to take control of what we're paying for through big deal agreements and setting up national agreements with publishers in a form of collective bargaining, be it through institutions or even in collaboration with the ministries who typically pay millions in big deal agreements. But this is simply trying to get hold of what we pay for or what we're paying to particular publishers. An alternative route, which is revolutionary, would take many years to set up, and it's hard to know how that would go, is to set up independent publishing platforms, independent journals, funded from a lot of the money that we're now already pouring into the system, but now controlled, owned, and run by the research community themselves. An example of this is, I'll pick one journal, which used to be called Lingua under Elsevier, and my colleague at Coalition S, Johan Roerijk, current professor in Leiden, in linguistics, did and still does manage this journal. Now, what happened with Lingua was the editorial team wanted more control of the journal and wanted more of a say in the journal, and this was denied at the time by Elsevier. So at the end of the very end of the year, on the 31st of December, the entire editorial team of over 30 people, plus Johan, resigned from the board of Lingua and set up their own researcher-owned journal called Glossa. So now not in Latin, this time in Greek. The problem with this journal was that it had no impact factor was not indexed, and we knew at the time that that would take many years to get to this impact factor. However, the research community behind Lingua mass stepped over to Glossa. They knew the editorial team, they knew the reasoning, and they completely supported it. Whereas now, Lingua, the original journal, has of course dissipated and gone down, and Glossa, this researcher-owned and controlled open access with small APCs, but open access journal, Glossa, has now been indexed, has got an impact factor, and is, you know, steaming ahead. So a small example of how you can shift if the publisher will not work with you. But we've not seen this scale out. We've not seen many other journals do this, and we've seen no real coordinated large-scale attempt to try this.
Thanks, Gareth. So we spoke a lot about the journals, so now it's time to understand what kind of metrics do you know. So if we can go back to the slides, please. Okay, I hope you are still online on the Menti. If you're not, you can copy the code above. So, which research indicators or metrics do you have heard of? Journal impact factor, H index, altimetrics, usage-based metrics. Okay. So we know that the most popular are always the journal impact factors and the H index. It's increasing also the awareness of the usage-based metrics, which is basically how many people are reading and how many downloads there are. Okay. Can we?
Yeah, we have to be careful with metrics like that for two reasons. It's hard to know what it means. Somebody can look at a record and never open it or download it, and somebody can download it and not read it. It's very hard to know who has actually read it, right? That's where citations have typically come in. They are supposed to have read it, of course, and are citing it because they're referring to the content. But with article views and downloads, it's very hard to know what has actually been processed and how has it been reused.
Thanks. Okay. I think we will proceed with the last questions, so we are about to close. So again, the slides, please. Can we show the slides? Thank you. So for you, which research indicators or metrics are most important or prestigious for you? I would like to remember you how the H index is calculated. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, the question, is it for me, which metrics is important for me, or is it what is happening in reality for me at the moment? So if it is what I would like to, it would be the usage based on number of reads and downloads, but what is happening now is journal impact factor.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to say anything, or are all agree?
Can I push back on that, Giulia? Because we have to be very, very careful of the use of indicators and metrics, and that's also what Karen was saying by looking more qualitatively. What does it mean if you have 100 downloads in one discipline and 100,000 downloads on the same article in another discipline? We know that disciplines, of course, differ. We know that subfields, specific theories and so forth will have certain participants, bigger or smaller numbers. So even just with the numbers, you have to be very, very careful and contextualize them within a field, within a subfield, even perhaps within a specific community. In one particular community, I know in linguistics, for instance, I know all of the participants. I think there's about 16. So if I'm lucky, I'll get 16 views, 16 downloads. How do I compare that with a community within linguistics, a theory that has 6,000 followers?
Sebastian was speaking. Do you want to comment?
Just the thought, after all, these are the things that currently are most prominent, and obviously also we see what's the reality, you know. But if you look at indicators and metrics, like Karen was saying before, that's anyway problematic. And if you look at it in a realistic picture, whatever other kind of metric you were gonna put up, those are gonna be over time at least gamed as well, because I mean, that's also how our funding and our careers depend on, right? So after all, any number game will be gamified and will be gamed. So they can be supportive, but they cannot be the main part of the assessment, or just be based on such a narrow set of quantitative indicators. And that's one whole point that Quora is about. That's one large argument that's given there and really very well explained there.
Thanks, Sebastian. I would like to ask to Clare if you are aware about good practices that are going beyond these indicators or metrics. I don't know.
Giulia, hello.
Hello. Okay, perfect.
So we have started to identify some of this good practice that's out there from an institutional and project perspective. And, you know, there are, you know, lots of support and training out there. And, you know, Gareth mentioned public engagement and open science. So there's lots of great initiatives that have been funded by the Commission and others in that space. In terms of that, how you connect it to the open science agenda, we're still picking through some of that. But I'm sure, I mean, I have to jump off now because it's 2:30 and I've got another event to go to, but I'm sure Gareth will be able to pick up any specific questions.
Okay, thanks a lot, Clare,
Ciao,
for
Clare, thanks.
participating.
Take care.
Thank you. Okay, if anyone has any other comment or questions also from the audience, because we are about to close. So any questions from the audience? Any comments? Okay. Okay, first.
Well, first of all, thanks and congratulations on the Opus project. And Clare before mentioned, like, how do we, I guess she said, help transforming the culture and help researchers. So, yeah, the comment is on about training the researchers, and until institutions do not recognize the importance of training in open science and culture of work that is more inclusive, equitable, and collaborative, then we will not move forward, even if there are already policies on research assessment. So I represent here Open Life Science, which is a grassroots initiative on training scientists. So if research institutes would more partner with such organizations and kind of incentivize researchers to do a training that is immersive or like learn by doing, it will be really helpful to create more multipliers in research culture. So.
Thanks.
I'd like to respond to this, Giulia, if possible.
Go ahead.
So thank you. Yes, we completely agree. So we've simplified it a little bit, I think, with Opus. Brian did mention it, but one thing we will deliver is this researcher assessment framework, the so-called Open Science Career Assessment Matrix, although it will not just focus on open science. Now, this is of course useless if the institutions themselves don't provide adequate support for the implementation. And that's what we mean in Opus by the word interventions. What we really mean here are actions and activities that universities will need to do to deploy the assessment framework, but specifically on those aspects or components of the framework that they find important. So let me give an example. Let's say an institution decides to incentivize and reward data management, and more specifically, making data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. So following the FAIR principles for metadata standards, and making data sets open. Now, it's pointless putting that into an assessment system if the researchers themselves don't even know what open and fair data is, never mind how to do it. So for that to happen, the institution will of course need to A, raise awareness about data management, fair data, open data, B, train, skill their researchers to an extent to know what this is and be able to do it, C, most likely assign or hire a data steward or repurpose a librarian's activities to act as a data steward to actually help them make a data set fair, open it up, and then publish and archive it. So without doubt, the assessment framework on its own is useless. What we really need side by side is that the research performing organizations and the research funding organizations provide the correct support to implement such a framework, to make sure that their researchers are aware not just of the framework, but the specifics in there that are relevant for them, and to support them in actually doing these activities in terms of open science. So I think we would all fully agree with this comment.
Thank you. Okay, I think now it's the moment to close the session. I would like to thank all the panelists for being here and all the audience to answer to our question and to be interactive with us. So see you tomorrow for other session on open science. I remember you that there will be 2 sessions, one again on research assessment and another one in the multilingualism in open science. So I hope that you would like to continue to hear more about the practices of open science and what are the challenges from it. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Giulia. Thanks, Brian, Sebastian, and everyone.